our good friend Ray Zahab, based in Gatineau right now. Ray is an adventurer and super endurance athlete. I think more than I'll ever be. And we're going to be talking about hydration today. How are you doing, Ray?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. As we were just discussing, we're enjoying the sunny weather and obviously the challenges that come with staying hydrated. So just as a quick introduction, Ray, tell us a little bit about yourself for folks who don't know you.
Well, so I'm an explorer. I do really long expeditions, typically in the most extreme environment for the location that I'm in. So, for example, I've crossed many deserts to the tune of 17,000 or whatever kilometers at this point, and most of those are in the summer in those locations. And as well, I've done many unsupported winter Arctic expeditions, as well as a trek to the South Pole unsupported, etc. Previous to doing expeditions full time, I was racing in ultramarathons competitively around the world. More the adventure ultra, sort of events like Marathon des Sables or the Trans 333 and these kinds of races that really piqued my interest. And previous to that, I was racing mountain bikes at an elite level. So, there you go. That's who I am.
There you go. Yeah, so it's a long history and therefore a lot of experience in nutrition, things when they go wrong, how to make them go right, hydration, all these things. So a thing we've been sort of observing here at Exact Nutrition is that sometimes people want a sort of a quick solution. Just tell me what to do, in one word, or is this pretty much how to hydrate for my race. And then we took a look at a 5K, a half marathon, a marathon, an ultra race, a multi-day expedition like yourself. And we can't give one single answer for all of these things. But we can sort of see certain patterns of needs. And certainly as it gets longer, those patterns become more similar. And so that's sort of where the start of the conversation is today. And so maybe we'll start with just observations that we've had on shorter distances, and this may be sort of a bit out of your field, but when we talk about a 5K race or a 10K race, someone running for, let's say, up to an hour, and maybe get a few people over an hour for a 10K and things, sometimes we see overkill in the way that they're carrying fluids with them. They're going to have maybe not just a water bottle, in a belt, but a whole backpack, 2 liters of water on their back, and that sort of becomes, excess weight to be carried, and maybe related to an expedition. You don't want to be carrying too much. We're just doing this in less than an hour's run, and so sort of how would someone stay hydrated? And normally it's just sort of look at yourself and say, stay hydrated before, drink afterwards, and you should be able to manage. And if there's something on the course in a 10K is going to take you an hour or so, grabbing a few cups is absolutely fine. But I think for the sake of your expertise, we'll sort of look at those longer distances now. And that's what we're talking about. Not just hydration before and after, we're talking about hydration during and the consistency of hydration in order to be able to successfully perform. Now, one thing that I've seen people talk about recently, and I'm not 100% in agreement with, is simply drinking to thirst. I don't know what your experience is. How would you plan? Let's say you've got a hot environment, whether it's a single day, a full day, or a multi-day thing. How would you plan your hydration accordingly?
Well, look, it's a super interesting question, and just based on how you had started, where you went with the distances and all that sort of stuff. Truth be told, the one solution for absolutely every distance is your body has to have the capacity to process the fluids that you're taking on board. Doesn't matter what you're drinking, doesn't matter how much you're drinking, doesn't matter how frequently you're drinking, nothing matters. Sodium, no sodium, sugar, no sugar. It doesn't matter if you can't process it. So the number one baseline item in proper hydration is being able to process those fluids that you take on. So quick example, when I'm training for an expedition, whether it's a middle of the winter Arctic expedition where it's 60 below, or I'm going to be in a desert and it's going to be 55 degrees Celsius above. I have a sauna barrel in my backyard, and I get that thing cooking, and I get in there with the hydration formula or fluids that I plan on using during my expedition. And early on in my training, I train my body to be able to take those fluids on board and process through them. The natural process of hydration is to provide your body with the minerals and electrolytes that it needs, but also to be able to sweat, so that when you sweat, you can cool. And it doesn't matter whether it's hot or cold. I mean, in the cold, sweat can be deadly. So, you want to manage that. That's a whole other discussion on how you manage that. But you do need to go through the processes of keeping stress levels reduced and keeping yourself hydrated. Now, on the note of distance, I've done ultra marathons where I ran, 330 kilometers in 60 hours, or 190 kilometers in, I can't remember what that was, 30 hours, whatever, in these races. And now being on expeditions where I'm covering daily distances that are really long, where I'm out there all day in the heat or in the extreme cold. Last year, I crossed Death Valley west to east, 2 mountain ranges, 36 hours, or I think that's what it was, or 35 hours. My point being is that it's all the same stuff. At the end of the day, when I go training, my longer training runs, I'm out there training right now. People think I run hundreds of kilometers per week. I don't. I run quality runs per week. I run approximately 2,000 feet of elevation per day because I live in a hilly area like you do. So I train on technical terrain so that my body can adapt to that. Because everything I do is off-road on my expeditions, and never rarely a trail. I run with intensity almost every run, not all the way full throttle, but I'm running with exertion on every one of my runs. And so I run with quality, but also up to 20 kilometers in my training runs, I bring very little with me. I bring what I think I'm going to need from a hydrative effect if there's an emergency. Because over the years, I've adapted to requiring less hydration. Now, I know there's been a lot of science written about this, and some people, it's impossible to adapt. Other times, other stuff you read, yes, you can. I just know that from all of the stuff that I've done over the years, my ability to process both calories if I need them and hydration is constantly tuned because I'm always training for the next thing. So it's like if you go, even though it's hot out right now in our summer, if you go to Death Valley right now and step outside of your car, you cannot believe how hot that place is. Then you fly home and you're like, what's 41 degrees humid? It doesn't feel so bad. It's all relative. Yeah. So hydration's kind of the same thing. It's not that you're pounding on your body and forcing yourself to drink less so that you'll get better at drinking less. Over a period of time in doing different things and your body be getting better at processing throughout your daily activities when you're not running, you create a hydrative effect. You're processing more fluids, minerals, etc. And then as you go into your run the next day, you're actually more hydrated, effectively hydrated. You have more minerals and sodium and electrolytes on board already. And over the years, these things get better. I know that's a really long answer, but what I'm trying to say is it's a very personal thing, hydration. And after coaching hundreds of people over the years, I really dial it down in working on nutrition and hydrative strategies for people that are doing events. I really dial it down to the individual. Find out where they're at with their hydration. Are they simply drinking a bunch of sugar water because they think that's what they're supposed to do? Or are they drinking all of that because it's what they actually need? Are they getting the electrolytes that they require? What is the maximum amount of electrolytes we can get into that person if they're a heavy sweater before things start to not function well? Yeah, there's a lot of criteria that come into play. But if you keep a journal, a personal journal, and you dial it, it won't take you long to figure out what your individual needs are.
And that's really interesting because you're highlighting two things for me. One that I hadn't actually considered a look at it, and that's actually kind of, it's not so much hydration. We're actually talking about heat adaptation and that ability to sweat accordingly. As you say, you step out into that heat in the Sahara Desert or wherever we're going to go, and it kind of just hits us. I remember flying to Australia for Christmas, And it's like -19 in Montreal when I left, and then I step out in Sydney, and it was like bang, the heat hit us.
Yeah.
And the first 3 days it was just wet t-shirts nonstop, and then after a while your body kind of gets a little bit more adapted because we become more efficient at that heat, to be able to sort of getting the heat out from us. And I think seasonally we can see that as well, because it's a gradual process. And obviously that dramatic day to day, flying somewhere else kind of thing has that effect. And so that's a really interesting way to see it's creating that adaptation. So our bodies can slowly, I don't know if evolve is the right word, but become trained to be able to do it.
Think about this. If it's winter in Broma where you are, and you step outside, one day it goes from -20 and it goes to +5. Guarantee you're running in shorts through downtown Broma in your running shorts, and it's +5. Now it's been 41 with the Humidex. If it goes down to 15 degrees Celsius, you feel like you're freezing your ass off.
Exactly.
Right? And you've adapted, right? But also, I want to say this, and I think it's very important for people when it comes to nutrition and hydration. Stress on the body of any kind, whether it's mental, emotional, physical stress, have an impact on your body and your body's capacity to process fluids and foods, and be able to function properly, to cool your body, keep your body warm, etc. I use my sauna whether I'm going on an Arctic expedition or I'm going on a desert expedition. I use it to train my body to process in a stressful situation. The stress indicator at this time, or the stress you load, is coming from heat. So regardless if I'm going to a very cold place, I'm stressing my body in intense heat in this sauna. I'm drinking fluids. I'm saying, body, I want you to function while you're under stress. I'm drinking. And then after about a week, your body's like, yeah, all right, dude, I get it. We're going to start sweating. We're going to relax. We're going to calm down, whether it's cold or it's warm. So it's super critical. And people need to think about this. When you go barreling into a race checkpoint, what's available to you at the race checkpoint is not necessarily what's in your refrigerator every single day. You're not reaching for orange slices and peanut butter sandwiches every day at home. You're probably, maybe for the super healthy eaters out there, you're eating like, I don't know, but like high quality quinoa. You're eating quinoa and rice every day and beans. And that's not what you're eating in the stressful situation that you can put yourself into physically, which is your ultra marathon or your race. So you got to think in those terms. The same thing goes with your hydration. You don't just start chugging. You're having a stressful day at work and you start chugging back, as much hydration as you can. You just don't, right? So you got to sort of balance your exertion level, your heat level with your hydrative effect. The super critical thing is people tend to overdrink. They really tend to overdrink, and then it causes all sorts of cramping and bloating issues where sugar is related, because they're getting more sugar at one time than they ever do during their daily day in their diet. And they're drinking that so much, they're bombarding their body with fluid because they think they need to. I'm not saying don't drink. I'm not saying get dehydrated. I don't want you to be dehydrated, but there's a balance.
Absolutely. And that comes back to that journal. One thing I took as a sort of a measurement, as you say, keeping that journal, monitoring yourself. We can, it's a unique situation. And so we can look at ourselves and see how much we may need to drink on a per hour basis. And then on varying conditions, see how much that varies. And so I'll give a great example of me last summer, maybe the summer before. I deliberately went out for a 30K run, 35K run with like 2 bottles of water, like 1 liter. And it was hot. I mean, it was like 30 something degrees and the Humidex off the roof. And I weighed myself beforehand. Then I weighed myself after, factoring in the fluids I'd taken in. So my total weight difference was a loss of 9 pounds. Then if I include that water, if I hadn't drunk the water, that would have been 12 pounds. That is crazy, crazy weight loss for 3 hours. But now I can look at the things and say, okay, 9 pounds over 3 hours is about 3 pounds an hour. And so that would convert into just over a liter, like say 1.25 liters per hour of sweating in very hot conditions. And so I need to make a note of that.
Yeah, but that's right on the money for an elite athlete. And so, where you are is, if you looked at the sweat rates back in when I did the Running the Sahara project, we were sponsored by Gatorade. And after that, subsequent to that, for many of my expeditions, South Pole and others, I was supported by Gatorade, so I had access to the labs in Chicago, and we would go down there and get sweat checked. They do the sweat rate, and so I was able to determine with a fair amount of accuracy how much I was sweating per hour in certain conditions. Now, the numbers totally escape me right now. I go completely on feel now, but I think that what you're saying, you're almost like you're the person in the lab. You're the ideal candidate, and looking at that. So it's safe to say on a hot day, if you are a trail runner who's not running the speeds that you are running, because we all know how fast you run. But if you're like a trail runner and you're out there and it's hot out and you're like, please just give me a number, some number that I can at least start out with and experiment with. A liter per hour, I think, is a really good measuring stick for people. And it's a great way to start out. And I think that's a really interesting point to hit home. The food journal and the hydration journal is when you write down and say, like you did, you can weigh yourself, you can do all of these strategies, but you also got to write down how you feel. You know what? Lost 4 pounds of water net after everything that I drank, but I got to tell you, I felt all right. Well, you're probably going to rehydrate really well. Your body's good at rehydrating after that. Or I lost 2 pounds net on this thing. I feel like trash and my legs are already heavy. It means you need to keep that balance up, right? So the food, that information that when you journal is critical to really dialing it in from a personal level, really knowing how things are functioning best for you.
Yeah, and I think that's important to look at not just that number, but the feeling afterwards. And I got to say, I remember that day, and I remember having to lie down in the cool, like almost in the basement and things, because, you know, I pushed myself to that level. And, you know, it was just drinking water and taking it easy. And the next day, it was a lot harder for me to run the next day because, you know, you could feel the overexertion as a result of that. I mean, the total distance, total time for me wasn't necessarily anything special, but the heat and the lack of fluids during was putting me into that sort of more, let's say, race style condition as a result. I had to recover like I'd finished a rather hardcore race.
And it takes you, if you look at that research, it takes you about a week to catch back up. And the fact that you had a mineral and sodium deficit in that period is very hard on your body. And so I've been there. I've been on expeditions where it's unbelievably hot. It's early days. And I have been a mess. I'm very good in the heat. It's the thing people always ask me, do I prefer the cold expeditions or the hot ones? I prefer the hot ones by a long shot. I can do the cold because I'm stubborn, but my body works better in the heat. And I've been curled up in a ball in one massive body cramp on the ground in the past, passing out because I'm so dehydrated. And it's not for lack of drinking. It's for an imbalance in mineral sodium, underestimating how much sodium I needed that day. These things are super critical. And I think that that's the other aspect that people need to look at is what level of sodium works for you. And it's not a, how do I say this, tricky game to figure out. It only takes a few hot days and you will know. You'll know the next day like you did. You know the next day when you wake up. If you still have legs the next day, aside from the fact that you had a big run the day before, but you wake up and you're like, you know what? I can go out again. I'm not achy. I'm feeling okay. You probably got it dialed. If you're waking up trashed still, doesn't matter. And you're like, but I drank a ton yesterday. I don't get it. And your eyeballs feel like they're all puffed up and you're just probably didn't get enough sodium. Probably didn't get enough minerals, you know?
And that's it. And down to a personal level, what the research shows us, it could be anywhere on an individual level. Like the majority of people in loss are in the 500 to 700 milligrams, almost just under a gram per liter. But there are a lot of people, and I mean, the other half are like 1 to 1.8 grams. And what's happened to us in the industry, as you mentioned, Gatorade, and they're a good drink, but their relative sodium level is only about 300 or 300 or 400 milligrams per liter. And so relative terms, it's actually quite low to what maybe a lot of people would actually need. And so, yeah, that identifying thing, it's, again, there's a lot of feeling. There's some great science and, you know, labs and things that could really hit the nail on the head to give us those answers. But we have to experience testing variety of things ourselves to be able to better see really where we are. Because
I think I agree with you. I agree with you. You know, it's interesting. It's come out. It's 10 years ago now that was the last time that I worked with the team at Gatorade and all the scientists. They're great people. and have since moved on to using various products over the years that many people have used already, until I landed on using my own sodium mixtures that are just basically sodium, and then I make my own hydration mix. Or and I, this is not, right up front, not a shameless plug for you guys, but landing on the stuff, that the electro that you guys are putting out. And Lawrence and I talked about this for a long time, and it's quite simple. You need something where people are getting low amounts of sugar, high amounts of sodium. Let's have that alternative, because we can make it easily balance it either way. I mean, it's easy for people to take this and customize if they need to, but for the most part, I used the Electro 2 last year in Death Valley. When I crossed west to east, I forget the exact distance, but we crossed, the first mountain range was 8,000 feet, then went down below sea level, and then crossed the second mountain range at 5,200 feet. All of it very arduous, because it was like bushwhacking and scrambling up cliffs and crossing salt flats and whatnot. Extremely hot out, and I stayed homeostasis the entire time. I never felt really bad, other than the physical exertion and the beating that my body was taking in the environment. I felt good. I think, really, it's finding the individual people finding something that works really well for them as individuals. But I think that where we are now with nutrition science is way ahead of where we were 5 years ago, which is way ahead of where they were 5 years before that. So what you have with Electro, it's something that, it's answering the modern question of what we know to this point. You know what I mean? For runners, and it's simple. I mean, so I think it's, the formula is simple. So that, I think, is fantastic. And again, Alistair did not ask me to say any of this. This is just what I think, right? So I'm telling you my opinion. You asked me for it, and so that's why I'm here. But again, people need to take that journal. They need to take that time to really record how it is that they're feeling, so that they can dial what's going to work for them best, and start thinking about nutrition from a real, how you activate on a day-to-day basis. Can I mention this also? And I know I go on and on and on, but for the runners out there that are watching this, and if you're like, well, I'm still not sure, I'll tell you, you'd mentioned before off camera when you were like, yeah, it's funny. A lot of folks, I see a lot of people drinking when they get thirsty. And I've always known that as the death knell for me. If I'm thirsty when I'm running, I have got a huge problem, because I'm already way down the road to dehydration. It's the way it goes. But, when I finish a run, if I am absolutely craving a bag of chips, like, it's not just the calories. If you are craving that salt, if you find yourself craving salty food, dreaming of salty food, you probably need salt. Your body's not going to lie to you that way. So it's another indicator of perhaps what was missed, during the run.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me, we did the Transestri 2-3 weeks ago now. And hydration was a big part of that. I felt really good throughout the whole of the thing, because my hydration was done really well. I think the energy downs were just kind of times where I was like, okay, I need to get a gel in, or some food in, because there's actually a calorie deficit at that point. But it's just the ability of having that feeling and being able to keep on going. And as you say, if you start getting thirsty, you're probably down that path of being dehydrated. Like, sort of, I guess there's that balance, is not topping up and overdoing it. So to make sure you're, at arm's length from dehydration, but not getting into that state either. And so again, it's practice and it's knowing us, and it's not an elite's tool. It's not an elite, you and I don't have that special journal. Anyone can make notes on their day's training, and whether you're training for your first half marathon in this crazy warm weather in the summers of Canada, or you're an ultra runner and going into a multi-day stage event, just keep taking notes and things, checking your weight on a daily basis as well. I remember when I was training for the marathon a couple of years ago, I'd even check my heart rate when I went to bed, and I knew if that was up, that was also a sign probably either overtraining or dehydration. If my weight was down and my heart rate was up, sure sign that there was a bit of dehydration in there.
It's such a good thing that you brought that up. It part and parcel with nutrition, part and parcel with hydration, is your sleepability. How much sleep, what your HRV is, heart rate variability. People can look that up. If you're starting to really get into all this stuff and you're like, you want the sciencey end of it and you want the science that's actually, you know, applicable stuff that any one of us can, I'm not a scientist, so give me the good stuff, right? Don't give me all the other stuff. And HRV, monitoring your sleep, these are the best indicators of where you are physically, physically and from a food perspective. I want to say a little segue story. I've learned more about nutrition, not just on my own expeditions and previous races, but I've learned so much by crewing others in their own races. So I've crewed my wife in all the 200 milers, and she's competitive. I've crewed a lot of people in different times. One of the most interesting stories where I learned something very effective in 2000, God, when was this? Well, it's got to be at least 10 or 11 years. I was crewing a friend of mine at Badwater. I've crewed at that race a number of times. And she's an elite ultra runner. She was going after it. And she's super experienced. She's also a very experienced adventure racer. I won't drop her name out just in case she'd be uncomfortable with me telling the story. But we got to like, I don't know, mile 30 in Badwater. And we're crewing her down the road, and she's doing the old wobbles down the road, and she's bloated. And so I knew right away that her capacity to process was off. And instead of feeding her more, like she was just like, I'm so hot. I feel horrible. I don't know what to do. I feel horrible. My head is killing me. I knew right away she was hyperhydrated, and she was that balance of electrolyte versus fluids and minerals in her body was off. And so we got to get her processing again. So you know what I did? I brewed up a couple of shots of espresso, and it's 1 billion degrees outside. And I said, you got to drink this. You got to drink it. And once you drink this, after you pee the first time, we'll start filling you up with hydration. You know, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this in a public forum because, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's bad science. But I'll tell you what, from a personal experience, she downed those shots of espresso. Dude, within 10 minutes, she started losing all that. Like I said, she was very functioning athlete, right? As soon as we gave the cue to her body, everything started to process through. She started losing all that excess water. She started feeling a little bit better. Obviously, a little boost of caffeine. We started pounding less fluid, higher sodium mix. Increase the sodium, a little bit less fluid, lower on the sugar. Let's just get the minerals into her. Boom, gone, done. Finished the race, killed it. So she was in such a massive deficit that it seemed like there was no way out, right? But obviously, for her, in her case, her body had just stopped processing. I've got a million stories like that where the little things, tweaks, change everything. And it's not a magic bullet. That was a very specific situation. But it's a specific situation that shows us how critically important processing is. You know?
Yeah. And that's, so as you talk about the caffeine and obviously caffeine's got some great performance benefits, but also high doses of caffeine have potentially a diuretic effect. That's that kind of, as you say, the triggering effect in there. My mind kind of went left and right with all these things saying, okay, so not just absorption, so once we get the fluids into our stomach, there is kind of an optimum sodium fluid balance for the perfect absorption through the stomach membrane. And it's actually just over a gram. I think it's just over a gram per liter, which is fairly high, sodium level. But that's just for the absorption, not necessarily what we lose, but for the absorption. There's actually research with just a little bit of carbohydrates, the sodium and the fluids, the combination of the three increases absorption as well. But as you say, she hits that blocking point where her sodium level is low, but her fluid level is high. It's kind of like stomach is filling up. She's feeling hot. She's going, I'm drinking so much and I feel bloated, but I'm drinking. But the body is basically just carrying a bag of water because it's not bringing that in. And if the body wants to absorb it, it's actually going to go and get minerals it already needs, bring them to the stomach to be able to put it through. And it's probably just going to refuse to do that. And that maybe that diuretic effect is saying, right, we've got to do something here. And that's how, you sort of triggered her body, which is interesting. I'd like to look more into that. But
and it's critical that people think about their hydration exactly in the way that you just described it, because that's what it's about. It's not about fancy formulas with fancy logos, and if Killian's drinking this, then I'm going to drink it too. And, newsflash, Killian's a beast. He could drink swamp water, and he's just an optimally performing athlete, right?
Yeah.
So, we've got to, all of us, look at us as individuals and play to those strengths, but also realize and understand that it's not the hype. It's really, this is how bodies work. These are the things you need. You need that sodium in order to process so that you can function optimally, right? And I think that that's so important, because I think we get lost. We get lost in different things. There's so many products out there. There's so many things, and then there's the reverse, where you go to a race, and just because the race is providing free hydration.
Nope. Did I lose you?
No, we're still here.
Oh. I said you got to bring what works for you, and I think that is what's is so critical for people, is to bring to the races what you've used, trained, processed with. Don't change it on race day for people. And that's another thing I've seen happen. I've had clients over the years reach out to me and say, look, I don't understand what's going on. I do all this training. I eat right. I'm resting well. I go to my races. I implode. I'm thrown up at the aid stations. Well, what are you eating? Whatever they have at the aid stations. What are you drinking? Whatever they're giving me. Well, there's your problem, right? Yeah. It goes back to that food journaling, writing down what foods work for you, and writing down that balance, of sodium to hydrogen. Going back to something else you said, is the audio still okay?
Oh yeah, it's fine. Go ahead.
Because I had my earphone thing. Going back to this 1,000 milligrams, you said a gram per liter, 1,000 milligrams per liter. My magic number personally, when I'm in a hot desert, is about 780 to 800 milligrams per liter, which is super, super interesting. The fact that it's that close. Now, to give people an idea, you have a handful of potato chips and you make up the difference of that 250 milligrams of sodium, right? It doesn't take long. We consume a ton of sodium in our day-to-day diets. People hear that and they get freaked out, because like, oh my God, it's so much salt. But you think about how much sodium you consume in a day. If you really pay attention, it's shocking how much salt. And this household, we put the Himalayan sea salt on everything, because my entire family runs, my daughters run, everybody runs, and they're involved in other sports as well. And so you need to keep those sodium levels up. If you want to be, sodium gets a real bad rap.
No, it's like sugar. Yeah.
It's bad if you are constantly eating fried chicken and you have sodium all over it. Yes. Yeah. If you're eating scoopfuls of sodium and you're eating sodium in its various forms, like nitrites, etc., then yes, it's not good for you. But if you're taking sodium in reasonable amounts as the body needs to function properly, sodium is actually very good for you. It's just research it and you'll see,
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on something very important there. There's an expression. If someone's worth their weight in salt, because salt had a high value, like a market value back in one day, because people recognized it had a need. But as you say, processed foods, refined foods, microwave dinners, burgers, all these kind of things that are pre-made, there's a ton of sodium in there because they want to make it taste good. Live a life like that, sodium becomes, can become a problem. However, we're talking in a very specific environment where sodium has its application, and it's like the sugar from energy gels. It's got the application in high intensity sports. It's replacing glycogen or helping glycogen reserves. It has an application, but I don't encourage someone to eat 6 fruit too, sat on the couch doing nothing.
Exactly.
That's just excessive. There's not much nutritional value beyond getting those carbs into your body, and so it's in that right context. And so sodium, like sugar, is your friend in these kind of environments.
I agree with that completely, and I agree with a nutrient dense diet is critical, balanced, and or however, I don't even want to get into the debate about all the different styles of eating, but whatever works for you works, food wise. And again, that comes from food journaling and experience and everything else. You figure out what works for you. But when you're eating foods and at the best quality you can and getting in that sodium, you're exercising a tremendous amount if you're a runner or a cyclist or anything for that matter. If you are a active lifestyle person. So these are replenishment materials. These are things you need to continue to do things you love to do.
Absolutely. I was speaking with a friend recently, and I was showing up a new trail up in the mountain, and she was walking up, and I was like, "You okay?" She goes, "Oh, I didn't have breakfast this morning. I didn't feel like it." I'm like, well, you need to change that thinking, not feeling like it. You need to have breakfast because you're putting petrol in the car to go somewhere. Like, it's kind of like, you have to change that mindset a little bit. And unfortunately, that is a bit of a separation between real life where we look after ourselves, we don't eat too much, we want to eat healthy and things. And then there's this kind of higher demand in sports environment. Michael Phelps eating 6,000 calories a day while he's training and stuff. But remember these areas and kind of put yourself into that thinking. And it's great to always think, if anyone's doing sport on a regular basis, think like an athlete. And so on down days, you eat less calories. On up days or preparation for big events coming up, you eat a bit more and stuff. And so there's that kind of that's more balanced. But again, we're maybe going a little bit off topic, the actual just hydration aspect of things, but all very important things to think about. That's interesting. You've got a very specific number, but again, a lot of experience behind that to find there and things. And as you say, a couple of chips at the aid station is going to probably bring up a little bit and up either side and things. I think often case is if you can get that sodium level up there, because it corresponds and keeps the balance of fluids. Because what I sometimes see is the kind of like people just hearing sodium out of one side of the conversation. So they're not drinking much and they're taking a load of sodium pills. But what that's going to do is not actually rehydrate them. It's not going to fix cramps. It's not, whatever it said on the bottle is not necessarily what it's going to do. It's popping a lot of sodium, but not necessarily hydrating. You need to bring those two things in parallel. So think about, as you say, like a liter per hour, or whatever is your sweat rate or corresponding to your sweat rate, and get that kind of sodium level in together. And as you learn more about your body, you get to those numbers.
The way I describe it, Alistair, to friends of mine who are just getting into it and they're doing their first real long trail runs, I say, think of your hydration bladder. If you're going, over an hour, 2 hours, whatever, and you got your 1 liter, 1.5 liter. Think of that as your IV bag. You want your sodium. You don't go into hospital and they start hammering you with salt pills. You're going to give you an IV, right? So I like to think of it. I tell people that's your lifeline. Get your sodium and your hydration. Have it mixed, so that you're getting that dilution into your body all together at the same time. I've always found that to be an effective, sort of way of describing how hydration from that perspective I think works really well, rather than, as you said, hammering the salt pills. Fantastic, you're getting your sodium, but maybe you're forgetting the hydration. And now we're way over on the sodium, way under on the liquid, way under on the water, and that's got a whole other set of issues associated with it. Yeah. So
I think we've probably touched on a lot of things where a huge number of people here, listening to this, will have gone, that makes sense. That makes sense. We may even caused a few people to go, well, what about this? What about that? And things. So what we'll do, I think, for today is we'll get this video online, encourage folks to put their questions in underneath. We'll keep an eye on the questions and, respond accordingly. And if new topics come up, then hopefully we can get back together and talk about whatever people bring to us.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But next time we'll talk about filling your hydration bag with dark roast coffee. It's a really effective thing too.
So on the early morning races, yeah.
That causes a few comments. No, just kidding. Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah, just IPA.
Now you're gonna get us in trouble. All right, buddy. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to have the chat today. It's awesome.
Ray, it's always an honor to chat with you and sort of, draw from your well of experience to excuse the pun. We'll hopefully get back together on another topic related to this.
Awesome. Chat soon.
Good. Thanks so much, Ray.
Bye-bye.